right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Taylor Bennett, and I'm presenting a webinar to you on functional shoulder anatomy. This webinar is based for prospective undergraduate athletic training or sports medicine students. Many of them have a pretty good working knowledge of anatomy, so what this webinar or discussion, whatever you want to call it, serves the purpose of is to kind of refresh them in terms of anatomy and make them aware of what's pertinent in shoulder anatomy that we'll deal with a lot on an everyday basis in sports medicine. So welcome to the webinar. I wanted to keep it kind of light. Got a little Fresh Prince Will Smith on there, and I hope to have a little bit of fun today as we go along and learn about the anatomy of the shoulder. So before we get going too far, I just want to get you familiarized with the different facets or tools in any meeting. On the very top up here we have the toolbar. You can see the mic, the camera, the desktop, the more, which we'll get into, and the moods. And down on the bottom left hand side we have the chat bar. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and text, and this chat feature is really nice. You can post to everyone, to the entire class, or if you feel more comfortable, if you have a question that you don't want everybody to see, you are more than welcome to send it to me, and I'd be more than happy to address that without singling anyone out. But I do recommend, I suggest that you post those questions so that everybody can see. That way maybe you and another classmate or another attendee have a similar question. We might be able to answer one with, hi Tanya, how are you doing? Can you hear me? We'll just go ahead and use the chat down here. For the purpose of this, I just have everybody muted, and I'll just present. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and go up to the My Mood section, and you can raise your hand. We'll do a few interactive things. If you're ready to go, you can go thumbs up, very similar to Canvas. Thumbs down if you're not ready. If I'm going too slow, tell me to speed up. That's not a problem. If I'm going too fast, you can tell me to slow down. All right? And otherwise, we'll just stand here. Okay. So these are pretty much the features of any meeting, and we'll get into the presentation. We'll be going over a couple different documents in here, primarily the PowerPoint presentation for functional shoulder anatomy. There's also a participation guide, which I've emailed out, and then outline notes, which you see here. So we'll just bring that up. It's a little more detailed than my PowerPoint. I didn't want to jam-pack the PowerPoint itself full of notes. So feel free to flip through those as well. And it's just a little more detailed for a take-home reference. Alrighty. So we're going to go ahead and open up the PowerPoint and get rolling here. Okay, and just before we start on the PowerPoint, I'm going to pull up a poll for you to take, just to determine how you feel about shoulder anatomy. If you have any level of comfort or no comfort at all, either way, it's fine. I just wanted to pull that up, and feel free to click on either any of those answers. All right, pretty awesome, pretty awesome. And if you want to go ahead and give me the thumbs up when you're ready, we'll get rolling into this presentation. Perfect. All right. Stop voting here, and away we go. Okay, so functional shoulder anatomy. The shoulder, more anatomically appropriately named, the glenohumeral joint, is comprised of the humerus and the scapula. The humerus is the long arm bone, the scapula being the shoulder blade, and it's a ball and socket joint, as you see in the illustration, the ball being formed by the head of the humerus and the socket by the glenoid fossa of the scapula. It's really a shallow ball and socket joint, so it's not the most stable, but that shallow depth allows for a lot of range of motion with the shoulder, and it's really a free moving joint, as I'm sure you're well aware. So you sacrifice a little bit of stability for a lot of movement. And the shoulder itself moves in 3 different planes of motion: the frontal plane, the transverse plane, and the sagittal plane. So we're going to go on to this next slide. This is a really lengthy topic, and I could really personally do an entire presentation on shoulder range of motion or joint motion. And so what I've done, and if I wasn't able to get you the documents for the PowerPoint, just let me know and I'll send them your way. I went ahead and attached a link here so that at a different time, or even at the end during the breakout session, if you're interested in looking at the video, it takes you through the entire range of motion of the shoulder, which is pretty extensive in all reality, and probably the hardest thing to grasp with shoulder anatomy itself. So it's a real, it's like a 5-minute video, shows how to assess shoulder range of motion, shows the normal values for every shoulder range of motion, and it goes from there. I will go ahead and just show you my desktop and share that with you so that you can see the video itself. Just a real quick peek over here on shoulder anatomy, and here we go. So it's got some pretty cool background music.
With normal abduction.
So that's kind of what it looks like, and feel free to check that out. If you need the link for it, just let me know and I'll post that over here in the chat section. All right. I'll pull up the PowerPoint. That's one thing about any meeting. It doesn't quite keep the stuff in place. Got it. So now on to the next section. All right. We have bony landmarks of the scapula. And you look at the scapula and it's kind of an oddly shaped bone. It's got a lot of prominences and protuberances. Everything's kind of sticking out here and there. And if you were to feel yours or even somebody else's scapula, you would feel kind of the odd contours of it. But all those contours act to, one, allow for muscular attachments, because the scapula is stabilized strictly through muscles primarily, and allows for ligamentous attachments to keep the humerus in the socket of the shoulder joint, or the GH joint, as I referred to it earlier. So on the left side, this is an anterior view of the scapula. If you were looking at somebody, that's kind of what you would be seeing of their shoulder blade, their scapula. You see the coracoid process, the acromion process, and all the different borders. I'm going to take you to an interactive website where you can kind of see everything in 3D rather than a 2-dimensional space there. In the middle, you have the lateral view, where you're actually looking directly at, from the side, somebody's scapula, and you see kind of the odd contours there. But it all makes sense here, and hopefully I can connect that here in just a minute. And on the right-hand side is the posterior view, which is really the truest view of the scapula, which is what you would see looking at somebody. You can't really see the anterior view of somebody's scapula because of all the muscles and the rib cage and everything. And so the posterior view is a pretty good representation. You see this big bony ridge coming along on the posterior side, running diagonally. That's the scapular spine. That kind of separates 2 muscles and also provides muscle attachments for a whole bunch of different muscles that we'll get into here shortly. You see the acromion process again hooking over, and the glenoid fossa on the far right side. You have the medial and lateral border. I'm going to go ahead and screen share again, and we're going to go over to this interactive anatomy app, which is right over here. Okay, so this just kind of shows the pertinent little areas there, the different bones, the different structures, and so I'll just kind of highlight these so that you can see them. And again, if you need this link, let me know. Feel free to throw that in the chat, and I'll give that to you either now or after the presentation if you would like to play around with that, but I'll just go through each one and highlight them. We have the AC acromioclavicular or AC ligament. If you've ever seen a separated shoulder or heard of a separated shoulder, it's an injury to this ligament itself, because that tears and the clavicle pops up. Okay, we have the acromion process of the scapula, which is that big hook that we just saw on the diagram there. Capsular ligaments, I'll get into that shortly. The clavicle, or the collarbone. The conoid ligament, again, we'll get into ligaments here in just a second, but this is a nice little tool to use to visually, as a visual representation. It's kind of interactive a little bit. I'm going to get out of the ligaments here. We have the coracoid process, which is kind of an oddly shaped thing, but again, you see the ligamentous attachments there as well. That acts as the insertion for actually the origin for the long or the short head of the biceps. And so there we go. We have the glenoid cavity, which is part of the articular surface, and the head of the humerus, or the ball of the socket. So we have humerus, scapula, shoulder blade, and this also, we can look at this from the posterior view as well. So we'll go ahead and check that out. All right, so again, you see the spine of the scapula right here, big bony prominence, very important. On the outside here of the humerus, we have the greater tubercle, which is a major attachment point for muscles, including the rotator cuff muscles, the 4 of them, and that's a really important spot to know because that's where a lot of things attach. Okay, we have the medial border sitting right here, lateral border, superior angle, inferior angle, and you see these little indentations in the scapula. These indentations provide more surface area for muscles. There's 2 muscles that sit in these specific indentations. Above here is the supraspinatus that sits in the supraspinous fossa. This comes over, sits in this groove, and the tendon runs right underneath the acromion process and attaches to the greater tubercle. And below that you have the infraspinatus, which sits in the infraspinous fossa. Infraspinous meaning below the spine, spine of the scapula. That sits here, tendon runs across and inserts right there on the greater tubercle as well, just inferior to the supraspinatus. And in terms of rotator cuff anatomy, the lateral border, the upper third, provides an attachment point for the teres minor, which we'll be seeing those muscles shortly, which is again another rotator cuff muscle, and that sits there, that originates there and runs all the way across and attaches most inferiorly on the greater tubercle. So we're going to come back over to the meeting itself. I'm going to stop screen sharing and we'll pull up this PowerPoint again. You can sense my frustration. Alrighty. Okay, so let's go in here. Again, this is a bony landmark slide of the humerus. We kind of talked about those in that interactive portion, but I'll go over a couple other things that weren't pictured on there. You see this horizontal dotted line midway through the humerus, and that I just made that. The upper portion of the humerus is more relative in relation to the shoulder, whereas the lower portion of the humerus is more relative in relation to the elbow. And so that's just kind of a general separation there. You see a couple other dotted lines, and the first horizontal dotted line going up towards the head of the humerus is the surgical neck. So if a surgeon were in performing a surgery on the shoulder, the humerus, etc., that is where they refer to the neck as. Now, the anatomical neck, you see these diagonal lines, is where the humerus forms the ball or the articulation portion of the humerus itself. So those are the bony landmarks of the superior portion of the humerus, which is what we're concerned about right now. And not to forget, we have the deltoid tuberosity, which is where your deltoid muscle inserts or attaches further down the arm. Okay, so we're going to go to the next portion. Real quick, I just wanted to pull up a poll, just a quick little quiz to see if I'm doing okay and if these things are making sense. So let me pull this up. Okay, do you see that? You're going to give me thumbs up one more time if you're seeing the poll there, or throw it in the chat. So what bones form the shoulder joint? Feel free to vote on that. Nailed it. Nice job. I'm going to vote too. We're on par. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, all right. Close the poll here. So we'll get into the fiber structures. We have 2 slides on this, and again, I'm just trying to do an overview. the fiber structures of the shoulder, as you see, there's a whole lot of complexity there, but really not in terms of sports medicine application, not a lot of issues with that. What's important to know, the scapulo-clavicular ligaments, as you see in the name, scapulo, meaning scapula, clavicular, clavicle, those are the two attachment points. So they originate on the scapula and insert on the clavicle. There are two, most often just referred to as the scapulo-clavicular ligament, but the two ligaments specifically are the trapezoid ligament, which you see on the diagram, which is closer to the right, and then you have the conoid ligament. Actually, pardon me, I flipped that. Trapezoid on the left, conoid on the right. And those act to, again, hold the clavicle down. Otherwise, without those ligaments, that your collarbone's really just going to stick up. Anyone who you've seen car crashes, someone broke their collarbone and their collarbone's sticking way up, it's because they tore those ligaments there, similar to the AC ligament. Acromioclavicular. Okay. Again, in terms of reference to sports medicine, we deal a lot with the shoulder capsule and a lot more with throwing athletes, as you can imagine. There's just a lot of joint forces going through that. But there's a whole large ligamentous structure, the joint capsule. There's a lot of little ligaments in there. What's important to know about that is that whether you hurt it, if you hurt it, whether it's one ligament or the other, it's still functioning as the same thing. It still gets hurt the same way, and you don't have to be as in depth. The joint capsule is the joint capsule. It all runs into one thing eventually, and really the purpose that it serves is to really just secure the head of the humerus to the scapula and to keep that joint intact. So when people dislocate their shoulders, this is what they're injuring primarily, and as well as the labrum, but we'll get into that in just a second. So if you were to dislocate your shoulder, you either tear the capsule or stretch it out to the point where the head of the humerus can pop out of the little facet there on the glenoid. So we'll go ahead and go to the next part, which is discussing the glenoid labrum. And the labrum is kind of like a suction cup. If you were to picture a golf ball on a tee, that is kind of what the labrum is. The labrum is the golf ball, and it's holding it in place, and it's kind of making that articular surface, the glenoid surface, a little deeper and a little wider, just making it a little more stable in there, as you can see right here, the glenoid labrum. This kind of blue ring on the picture is the joint capsule if it were cut away, so we're just looking directly at the labrum. And in terms of sports, this is one of the most commonly injured structures in the shoulder, just because, again, like I said, if you dislocate it, then you actually tear the labrum away from the humerus, and then you have a whole load of problems. So that's for a different time and place. Like I said, it fastens the humeral head to the fossa. What is the labrum? Let's see here. I wish I had a point thing. Now you see on the bottom right hand corner, it's the white area. So the labrum sits inside the glenoid fossa and then extends out kind of like a suction cup, and attaches to it. It basically grasps the ball, which is the head of the humerus. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So we're going to go on to the bursa. Bursas really are just little sacs of fluid around joints. You'll find them around every joint in the body, and they just help to reduce friction. Most times you'll find a bursa in an area where there's a bony prominence, where you have kind of an oddly shaped or pointy piece of bone, so that when there's a tendon running over it, it doesn't drag on the bone. It doesn't create friction so much, and so you'll find these all over the place, but there's a bunch in the shoulder. The one that's most applicable to us in terms of dealing with injury is the subacromial bursa, and you can kind of see that it's the little one up on the top underneath the acromion process over here, and that acts to really help out the supraspinatus tendon in its movement, and a lot of times that'll get impinged. So what you see with like frozen shoulder, if you've heard of that, that's a lot of times a flaring up of the subacromial bursa and the supraspinatus tendon. and there's really just not a lot of room. So if that gets flared up, then the shoulder really doesn't have a lot of potential for motion, if that makes sense. And this is the prime portion of the presentation, because if you don't remember anything at all, except for one slide, this would be the one to remember, because the rotator cuff muscles do the most in the shoulder. The rotator cuff muscles are dynamic stabilizers. There's 3 on the posterior side, 1 on the anterior side, and they really stabilize the shoulder in all the different planes of motion. You see the most injuries for rotator cuffs in overhead sports or even swimming. So baseball, which is actually what I work right now, I've got a lot of these: swimming, javelin, even tennis a lot of times. I'm sure I'm leaving a few out, but that's okay. But they act as the brakes. They've got to slow the arm down when it's moving forward. And so that's how they tend to work. So on the posterior side, I like to think of it in segments. Posterior side, you have the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor, which we kind of looked at in the interactive little web app, I guess you could call it. And then we have the subscapularis on the anterior side. Now, if it's on the back side, usually it moves the arm backwards and externally rotates. And then when the arm comes forward, these muscles will fire to keep the head of the humerus well inside the joint, basically stabilizes the joint. Okay, and then the anterior would do the opposite. It moves the arm forward, so the subscapularis would move the arm forward and internally rotate it. And when the arm's coming back, the subscapularis holds onto the head of the humerus and keeps it in place. So we'll go to the next slide. We're just about done. Hang in there, Tanya. We have the scapular stabilizers, and these are huge. These are super important as well, because you see the scapula sitting there. Really, there's no bony attachments. The scapula is almost a floating bone, more or less. And the only thing that attaches it to the main portion of the skeleton, or the axial skeleton, is the clavicle, which is really not a big attachment either. So there has to be a lot of muscles attached to the scapula to keep it in place and to keep it moving correctly and to keep it from really just flying off. So these muscles do a whole lot of work, a lot of time, and they really help. I like to say these reduce the injury the most, because if the scapula is moving the right way, then other muscles won't be compromised, more or less. So we'll go ahead. I'll just list these off. So we have the levator scapulae. You can see by the first part of the name, levator, makes more sense, kind of elevates, right? That's on the left-hand side of the diagram. It sits deep to the upper trap, and it attaches on the cervical vertebrae, the transverse process of the cervical vertebrae, 2, 3, and 4, and attaches to the medial border of the superior angle. And then we have the trap, or trapezius. I just call it the trap. There are 3 portions: the upper, middle, and lower, but the middle and the lower portion only act to stabilize. The upper doesn't do as much in terms of stabilization of the scapula. And so just big dynamic movers. They help to retract or pinch the shoulder blades, as well as upwardly rotate the scapula itself. And rotation is based off of the glenoid fossa rather than the middle of the scapula, if that makes sense as well. And then we have the rhomboids, which sit deep to the middle and lower portions of the trapezius, and those act also to retract the scapula, pinch the shoulder blades together. We have pectoralis minor, which isn't shown. That sits on the anterior side, and it's deep to the big pec major. It attaches at the coracoid process and then runs down to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th ribs. And it's kind of like, it almost looks like fingers running down. That acts to protract or push the shoulder blades away from the body, kind of the chicken wing deformity you might see when people stick their shoulder blades out. And it'll protract, and it also elevates the scapula, and it helps with breathing. Okay, and then below that, the last one here on the lateral side of the left portion of the diagram is the serratus anterior. And a lot of people, some people with really defined muscles or a lot of muscular definition. You'll see the kind of like finger-like projections there on the ribs, and that is the serratus anterior. It's a very long muscle, but it attaches to the first 8 ribs and then to the medial border of the anterior side of the scapula. And it helps, again, protract, kind of like the pectoralis minor. But this is the primary protractor. So real quick, I'm going to do one more pull for you. We'll just make this fun. And then we're going to have a little fun activity. It shouldn't take very long. Okay. Oops, wrong portion. Pull. All right, so this one, that's awesome. Well, I've actually tried to volunteer for a couple Ironmans and stuff like that, so I definitely enjoy watching the triathletes. It's pretty hardcore, so that's awesome. I'll unmute your mic here in a second, and we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. All right, so we got a poll here. What muscles comprise the rotator cuff? Just a quick assessment. Make sure things make sense. Nice, you're on it. Nailed it. All right. Submit the votes. You're 3 for 3 today. Nice job. Close polling. Okay, so now that we're on the scapular stabilizer, you see all these kind of odd, Latin names. And, what I was sitting here thinking while I was creating this presentation, another thing that has Latin names is dinosaurs, right? So let's go ahead and have a little fun. Take any of these words and combine them to make the most ferocious sounding dinosaur name. That's our fun activity. So when you go ahead and you can type that in the chat bar, and I'll type one as well once you're done, and we'll have a little fun. Okay, sorry. So I was thinking of these Latin names that comprise anatomical structures, and Latin names are also used to describe animals and dinosaurs, and that was just a random thought that passed through my head when I was making this presentation. So a lot of these words are 2 parts. So if you were to take a part from each word and combine 2 words to make a dinosaur name, I thought that would be kind of fun to make the most ferocious sounding dinosaur name you could think of out of any of these words. Definitely the serratus. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that in there as well. Serratus scapulae. I'm just gonna go ahead. It's just you in here. We're gonna unmute your mic. Oh, I'll do that here in a second. So here is my dinosaur name. Serratus scapulae. So I think it has sharp teeth and big shoulder blades. Alrighty. We'll go on to the auxiliary muscles of the shoulder. And this is kind of debatable. There's a few things I could have thrown in to rotator cuff, or scapular stabilizers, even though those have a specific definition of what those muscles do. But on the anterior side, you have coracobrachialis, triceps brachii, biceps brachii. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with this, Tanya. And the pectoralis major. These act on the shoulder, but they don't do the primary stabilization, which is what the other muscles do. Pectoralis major is definitely a big mover, but doesn't necessarily stabilize the shoulder as much as rotator cuff or scapular stabilizers. Biceps brachii flexes the shoulder, triceps extends the shoulder, and coracobrachialis flexes the shoulder as well. On the posterior side, we have the trapezius. Again, there's the 3 components, but in terms of auxiliary muscles, the upper section is more auxiliary than the middle and lower, which are dynamic stabilizers. And you have deltoids, which that could be argued to be in dynamic stabilizers. especially the posterior deltoid, but I just threw it in here. It's not necessarily part of the definition of rotator cuff or scapular stabilizer. Teres major, which is an internal rotator, and the lat does a whole lot of things, has a whole lot of attachment points, and pretty large muscle, actually the largest muscle in terms of surface area in the body. So that's the last part there. I'm going to go ahead and change this. So I want to do discussion mode. There we go. Sorry about that. And I'll bring up the PowerPoint again. You having fun, Tanya? Hello? Hello? Okay. Now I wanted to use the whiteboard. We're going to do the breakout session here real fast, and it's going to be real simple. But any question that you have, we'll use in the breakout session. But this is just kind of a slide for the course itself that we set up, which is shoulder evaluation. That's what I set up. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go, if you go up to the more section, you can go to the portion where it says take meeting notes. And you can type in a couple things, the 3 things that you liked, didn't like, had questions about, etc. Aha moments for this presentation, and then if your mic's working or we can get it to work, we'll just go ahead and chat about that. I'll go ahead and label that for you. There we go. Alrighty. Did that make sense, Tanya? All right, perfect. Oops. And then when you're ready, you can just go ahead and give me the thumbs up and we'll start chatting about those. I wanted to give you a little bit of time to think about those. All right, cool. I cannot hear you just yet. Oh, I thought I saw something. Here, I'm going to mute myself.
Your line is now muted.
Try that again.
Your line is now unmuted.
No, that's not a problem. I mean, we can chat if that works. If that works for you, we can definitely just type it up. Not a problem. Or I'll just talk. But yeah, going to your the first thing you listed there, it is pretty amazing. You know, you see all the different things, and really the scapula is just probably in terms of relation to all the other bones. It's just really one of the oddest looking bones in the body, and you say, well, what purpose does that serve? And then you see the anatomy of it, and it serves a great purpose. You know, it allows you to use uh, your arm, I guess. Let me see what I'm trying to say here. It really just allows for your arm to do what your arms do, I guess. That's the only way I can describe it. If it was formed any other way, you might have an arm that worked like your hip or something like that. If it was a different type of joint, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, um, pretty amazing how everything kind of works in concert, and uh, to kind of see the big picture once you break it down in terms of all the different little structures. But if you don't have any more questions, let me check the meeting notes one more time. Nope. And just give me the thumbs up if you're good to go. Otherwise, we can chat. And but if you're good, I'll just shut this down. And I appreciate you stopping in and taking a listen. Perfect. All right. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. And you have to let me know if you end up doing any triathlons nearby. It'd be fun to come check out. I think that's it. So take care. We'll see you later.